At 9 o'clock, I'm going to call the Marathon County Infrastructure Committee to order. Everyone, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And we move on to number 3, public comment. I didn't receive any requests for public comment. So we'll move on to number 4, approval of the April 6, 2023 Infrastructure Committee meeting. They're in your packet. Is everyone had a chance to review it? Any discussion, changes? If not, I'll look for a motion to approve. Supervisor Robinson and Supervisor Gisselman with a motion to approve. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to number 5, policy issue discussion and potential committee determination. 5A, discussion regarding 2024 annual budget and policy recommendations from the committee. Lance, are you going to take that, or John, you're going to take that? 5A1.
I'll start it off, and Lance will correct me as we go through it. So we have embarked upon a new process where we're trying to get input from the standing committees early in the development of the 2024 budget process, and we outlined that process to you, and it's based upon looking for committee involvement in terms of what services do we provide, what the level of services are, evaluation of the mandates versus non-mandated programs, and other things. Those in conjunction with that, we're taking to the county board. Well, next Wednesday, the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee will be meeting to talk about some of the priorities for the budget in terms of our compensation, our health insurance, our use of debt, other things, and be presenting those to the county board at their May meeting to help frame how we're going to develop the budget. But what we are looking for at the committee level is for you to weigh in and to identify what programs do we deliver and at what level? What are our target populations? How do we use fees? What percentage of the budget should be derived from fees? Where there's the ability to impose fees, and then where are we going on in this case, we're starting to work on that Washington County type approach on a 2050 plan. How will that long-term plan for capital expenditures fit into what we're doing here in terms of the general transportation aids, and how do we maximize those aids? But when we look at the committee or the reporting agencies under the Infrastructure Committee, we have CCIT, which is an independent board that really presents its budget. That budget is developed by through an agreement that we have entered into with the healthcare center and the city, but they've got a levy of $2.5 million. Last year we saw a significant increase in it, but it's because of some of the new programming going on. But the highway department is a $40 million plus department, of which 9.7 million comes from the levy, or 24%. It represents 18.2% of our budget. The airport is a $5,587,000 price tag with none of it on the levy because it's an enterprise and operates independently. And then we have debt associated with the airport at about $1.2 million. But what we're hoping to do with the committees is to have you provide inputs as to what programs should we provide. Look at the handouts that you received. That includes a description of what mandated services are and what are not. But a service may be mandated, but then the level of service may be a decision that the county board can have. I'll just use the sheriff's department as an example. We're required to have a sheriff's department. We aren't required to have a bomb squad. We're not required to have a SWAT team. We're not required to have a crisis assessment response team devoted for them. So within that mandate, yes, you have to provide the service, but the level of service is somewhat more controlled by us as a policymaker. The input from the committees will then go to administration, and they'll develop the budget. It'll be presented to you, and you'll have a chance to review and comment on it through the budget process. And the ultimate arbitrator of any discussion or decision is the county board when we adopt the budget. But we're looking for more meaningful input. And one of the things that that we need to remember is that not every dollar is the same. And we talked about the highway department having a $40,406,000 budget, but the levy is $9,759,464. 24 cents comes off the levy. The rest comes through other fees. So if you cut a dollar, you're potentially impacting other funding from other sources. So I think that the long and short is we hope that you can develop a better understanding that not all dollars are equal, that a cut doesn't always correspond to the intended or doesn't always have the intended results. And we have to look at it a little bit more carefully. You also have a fees schedule, rates and fees, and their highway department has a number of fees. The airport has parking fees in others that are pretty much set by them, but I don't know if we have the ability to review those or make suggestions to the airport board on what they might do with those, but again, it's an enterprise account. And then we'll look at the long-term expenditures. And with that, I'll turn it over to Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, John.
Good morning, everyone. I really don't have much to add. Supervisor Robinson did a very nice job kind of laying out how, at least from administration's perspective, how I think you can best assist my office in the development of that budget. Your committee is, as Supervisor Robinson referenced, a little bit unique in that you have those two other departments or multi-organizational departments with Central Wisconsin Airport and City County Information Technology, in that you will provide input, or you could provide some input to them, as Supervisor Robinson referenced, relative to perhaps fees or service levels, but those budgets are essentially prepared and brought to the county through the work of those independent boards. And again, with respect to Central Wisconsin Airport, they really do operate as an enterprise. The county did allocate some funding for purposes of a grant application relatively recently, but outside of that, really it's just utilizing the county's bonding capacity for purposes of borrowing that Central Wisconsin Airport leverages through its operations. But with respect to City County Information Technology, if you do have some input through your budget discussions that you would like the commission to consider, I think there's certainly an opportunity for that. But outside of that, I think Chair Robinson laid out the process that we are attempting, and this is new, so we will stumble undoubtedly. But starting the conversation with what services we provide as a county, and then to do that, you'll be utilizing that mandated and discretionary document, and the Highway Department starts, I believe, on page 32 of that document. Really beginning there and moving then to what service level, and I think at what service level do we provide those services? Because while some of those services may be mandated, as I referenced in that document on the first substantive page, there are a number of programs that are mandated across the county, but it's far less frequent that the state says, not only is there a mandate, but it's at this exact service level. And I think your work around the pavement rating system and what our target should be is a perfect example of that. Certainly the counties do have obligations that exist relative to highway maintenance, but it's not as though those requirements are set forth in statute or administrative code that say you need a PACER rating of 6.8 across an average of 6.8 across your highway system. That's a policy decision for this board, and I think it's somewhat helpful. We had a discussion. This is now the third committee that's had this discussion. When you look at service level, a couple of things have resonated with, I think have resonated with other committees, what those might look like. Time, how quickly, for a permit, for example, what is the turnaround time? If in your interactions with constituents, your sense is that our service level is meeting expectations, perhaps exceeding expectations, that perhaps we should ratchet that service level down to perhaps alleviate some cost pressures, we can do that. Or if you hear the converse, I think there's an opportunity for you to provide that feedback to us as well, that you'd like to see us improve that service level. So time, quality, I already referenced the PACER rating. That's a really clear example of what that might look like. And then Supervisor Robinson referenced target population, because we do have some programs that are based on that are generally not available to the entire community. So target population can be something that you'd look to. And then lastly is cost. At what cost do we deliver those services? And that's that rates and fees schedule. So those are the conversations that we've had at the other committees. The feedback we've gotten has been, I think, first and foremost, that this is a lot of information, and I think we certainly appreciate that. From my perspective, in terms of most the conversations that is of the greatest priority, I think it starts with that service level piece, because that's the thing that staff would need to learn. We would need to know, earlier in the budget process. So, for example, if the direction was to end program X, whatever that program is, and either do something else or perhaps not, we would need to know that early in the budget process to assess, okay, what does that mean in terms of staffing availability for other projects, for reallocation, or if the direction is end that program and not make some service level determinations, we'd need to manage that internally for 2024. The service level is kind of in between. We could bring you back what it might look like if you wanted to increase that PACER rating, for example. If your direction was, an average of 7 across the system isn't where we want to be. You could say we want to be at what would it look like to be at 7.2 or 7.3, 7.5, and we can develop those plans for you to assess. And then lastly, cost. The rates and fees can come later, but we'd like to have a conversation with you about the rates and fees that have been set. We have a number of departments that, most recently the medical examiner's office is one where the county board approved some fee increases recently, but before that, those fees hadn't been looked at in a number of years. And then we have other departments that have looked at the fees more regularly, and I spoke with Jim before this meeting. The highway department recently, through this committee, did have conversations about rates and fees. I believe, Jim, you said 2021. Correct. So happy to have those conversations. One of the pieces that came out of an earlier committee meeting was the idea of understanding the fee philosophy. So what that discussion was whether or not the fees that we're setting within our within our departments, and those are generally set by either a program committee or a standing committee, whether those fees are, the direction is, we want to recover 100% of cost, 50%, or somewhere in between. What philosophy is guiding that? Because that, again, is a county board decision, where the statutes haven't preempted your authority, of course. But a driveway permit, what is the fee philosophy underlying those sort of permits? Is that something that should be borne 100% by the applicant, or is there some sort of public good that accompanies that regulatory system whereby you believe, as the policymakers, that fee should be offset by some other form of revenue, such as tax levy? The other takeaway, I think, that came from the committees as we've had these discussions is starting with those what services are we going to provide, is my sense, more effective than starting with the result of the tax levy conversation. Because as Supervisor Robinson referenced, there's a great deal of other revenues beyond sales tax, particularly for, as John referenced, the highway department's a good example of that. And we know from that presentation that the operating tax levy is largely what it is. I mean, it is going to be what your levy was last year plus your allowable net new construction number. You'll maximize that because that is the fiscally the most prudent approach because you do have debt obligations. It's the lowest cost way to fulfill those. The overall tax levy rate is something that you can, through other avenues, manipulate should you choose to do so. As last year, you utilized reserves to essentially further reduce that tax rate. You have things that are outside of that levy rate. Bridge and culvert aid is a great example. The library spending, should you choose to get in the emergency medical service delivery business, that is outside of the levy. And finally, as is borrowing. So those are the tools you have to address the overall levy rate. But the conversations to this point, I think, have yielded a couple of those kind of major takeaways, which is that order that we talked about. And we have staff here. If there are questions that you have about what is this program, what are the when you look at the rate and fee document, help us understand the philosophy. We're here to try to help you gather that information. It may be that we'll have to bring it back. We likely don't have everything you might ask today, but we'll do our best to answer those questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Administrator Leonard. Supervisor Robinson?
But I'd like to just pick up on that and throw in a complicating portion of that. You know, it gets into the discussion on the general transportation aid. You know, when you look at our, you know, it's a 6-year rolling average, and we get reimbursed by the state. In the last couple of years, we've been decreasing the amount of state aid because our expenditures relative to other counties has gone down, and in some cases, the 6-year average is going down. And in 2016, we spent $17.3 million on a project that will fall off next year. In our 6-year average was $15 million. So we will more than likely, unless we do something dramatic, see a further decrease in general transportation aids. And I think what we want to try to do from a committee level is perhaps look at how do we stabilize or slightly increase that so we don't have these blips, because what happens is we get the estimate of the general transportation aid late in the budget process. And, you know, all of a sudden it's a cut, and the first thing that the county board historically did, well, if they're cutting back state highway general transportation aids, we're going to cut the highway budget. And what that did is it compounded the problem because your base went down. And I think one of the things we want to try to drive, and what we've been looking at the Washington County model, is to schedule those projects in such a way that we fully utilize the 6-year average and not have a decrease in general transportation aid and smooth out those ridges, because we've got $17 million in 2016, 14.5, and 17, 13.4, and 18, and those will fall off, and we have to make sure that we've got at least those the equivalent of those in there, and hopefully a little bit more to capture additional state transportation aid.
Thank you. I just, as you know, what's interesting is you gave the example that this program, you want to cut $1, you're really cutting 24 cents. How do we know that? I mean, is there a way to find that out? I mean, like you said, you say we cut a program that's going to save 100,000, but really it's only going to save, 24,000. So, go ahead, Administrator Leonard.
That's a great question, and that's a good point. When you look at that 5-year document that was sent to everyone, when we have, as was referenced, if a department, social services, for example, if you look at that, I believe it's 34 cents, or 34% of their overall budget is tax levy supported. But your point is absolutely accurate. There are programs, that's not 34 cents across the board. That's the average. So you do have to have that conversation about what are the programs. First of all, are they mandated? Then we can talk service level. Funding, I think, it's certainly important. My sense, and this came out of some of the other conversations, my sense, however, is that as policymakers, interfacing with the public, understanding the importance of the program is of the utmost. Is it mandated, and is it highly valuable to the public? The funding part will shake itself out. I mean, if there's a program that's exceedingly valuable, well, it's mandated, it's exceedingly valuable, the high service level is appreciated by the public, it's important to you as policymakers. The fact that it's 100% tax levy is important to consider, but it's not going to probably, in my sense, drive your decision as to whether or not you maintain the program. The sheriff's office is a perfect example of that. There are a lot of programs that Chair Robinson just referenced. Those are tax levy funded. If you look at the sheriff's office, that's about the closest department, and administration as well, closest department to a dollar, each dollar within the department being a tax levy dollar. So that's not going to answer your question, but if you have a program where you're like, you know what, I'm questioning this isn't mandated, questionable value, help me understand what the funding mix is, we can bring that information to you. It's a little bit complicated because we don't, if you think back to the book that all of you received from Wisconsin Counties Association, there's a couple of pages in there that talk about budgeting and governmental budgeting, and they talk about how those budgets are done, and it might be consistent with how personally you've budgeted or your business. All of you received the 600 plus page line item budget. That is a pretty standard approach in the state of Wisconsin for how governments budget. What you're talking about, Chair McEwen, is kind of that program budgeting, which is somewhat different. And to get that, the best we can give you are estimates for most programs, because we don't have our budget broken down by program. It's by line item. So you make analytical assumptions. What's the staffing? What portion of staff go to this program versus what portion of staff go to these other programs? For example, within conservation planning and zoning, they deliver, shoreland zoning, zoning for non-metallic mining, all these other various programs. We generally don't have a budget that just says shoreland zoning, and staff only assigned to shoreland zoning and revenues only assigned to that. It's an overall department budget with line items of personnel, various supplies. So it's more complex. I know that's not the answer anyone wants. We can get that, but I'm not sure we can get that for this year. That's the whole idea behind priority-based budgeting. And we would need to do a pretty significant lift of allocating staff, allocating expenses across those program areas. But the short answer is right now our budget is more line item, which makes it harder. But we can, if you have a program that, hey, I'd like to know more about this, what's the funding mix, we can give you the best answer we can probably at your next meeting.
Thank you. Supervisor Dickinson?
So along those lines, one question I would have is, how do we know what the programs are? So we start to get into the weeds when we have to identify a particular program, digging down deep into every department or something like that. I mean, stating, the PACER rating, that is an overall arching kind of a policy that we state, but the specific projects within that, we don't know how that relates, if you see where I'm going with that. There's other things that are done in the highway department that don't have to do with the PACER rating. So what are all the programs that are being carried out? It becomes very difficult as we start to go down line by line. And as a board member, I'm looking at this a little higher up in the sense that if one has an opinion to say, I believe that our government is too large, and so therefore I would be looking for a reduction in the size of the government, does one have to go specifically into every program or every committee or every department and say, pick, 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 or can one say 0.5% across the board? That's the policy. Figure it out.
Thank you. Supervisor Robinson?
I think you've got two parts to that question. This came up yesterday at Health and Human Services, and I think one of the ways for you to better understand the programs is to perhaps at our regular meetings have them come in. You know, you have winter maintenance, you have construction, you have maintenance, you have our state contract, and go through those various programs to get a better understanding of what the level of effort is, what the staffing requirements are, and get a better understanding of the parameters of what the expenditures are and how it might impact us. So you've got, there's the ability outside of the context of the budget to develop that baseline and understanding of what they do. And Jim and his staff do a very good job of going out and capturing those non-county levy or vehicle registration fee dollars to try to minimize the impact on us. In terms of the problem with the blanket approach of reducing it 5%, or 0.5%, we have a contract with the state, we aren't going to reduce that. So when you look at so those costs are fixed, we're going to get that money, so it shifts then the impact of that to the remaining program, and instead of having a 0.5% impact, it could have a 2.5% impact on our ability to plow roads or construct. So you really almost have to have that detailed understanding or that discussion, because an across the board isn't applied across the board. There, 40 million of expenses, 9 million of levy. What are you trying to impact? The size of the department or the impact to the taxpayers? And I think those are the questions that you have to get into, because there are different answers depending upon how you approach it. But that across the board isn't an across the board, because you can't change those contracted amounts.
If I can add one thing before Jim jumps in, I mean, certainly you can provide me that direction. I mean, it's a very blunt instrument to do that. I also just would be very upfront with you that some programs, our budgets are estimate, as every budget is an estimate, but they are estimates of expenses that we will incur regardless of what your budget is. So a good example is, the jail. We do a lot of things. I check the jail list every day. I checked it this morning to see how many people are housed out, how many people are housed within our facility. Meeting with Chad later this week to follow up on a couple of things to manage those budgets. But that will be, the cost for inmate housing will be what it will be based on the determinations that are made by the courts and how many people are able to post bond and how many people are in there serving sentences. That is an expense that we manage through spending money elsewhere. For example, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, our Justice Alternatives Program, the DA's Office diversion programs, all those things are expenditures in one area, hoping to reduce expenditures elsewhere. Another example is the child protection budget. You have funds that you allocate each year for purposes of foster care, correctional care placements, residential treatment foster placements. The placement decisions made by judges and by our social services professional are the decisions based on the best interest of the child, not budget. And there have been years where we do our best to estimate, but things happen. A correctional care placement, for example, at Lincoln Hills, I can pull it up, but my recollection is it's like $390,000 a year. We budget 1 or 1.5, but if you have the difference between, of course, one or two, and similarly, high-cost placements for children with significant behavioral issues they're expensive. So when you go from, if we have a budget of 6 and we end up having 10, or we have a budget of 10 and we have 15, that will be what it will be. And historically, you have had that happen on occasion, and the response is that we take it through the committee system for a budget amendment. And there's whether those funds are taken from contingency or more often, I believe that's been taken from reserves to fund those things. So you certainly can do an across-the-board reduction, but it's the nuanced response is there are some things that as Supervisor Robinson referenced, aren't going to perhaps yield you the result you may have intended. And secondly, there are things that just won't yield a result. If things come to pass, they come to pass. And the flip side of that is likewise true. If our child protection placement needs for a given year are less than what we budgeted, that amount rolls over. It's not used by that department for something else. We're not going to go take it and purchase capital equipment or something else. It's in those line items for those placements. It rolls over into that unassigned fund balance that we've talked about. Similarly in the jail, it's not as though those placement costs can be utilized for something else. So we do our best to estimate those things, but you are in a position where there are services that are mandated that you provide, that are provided, and we just have to find a way to do it. And the budget is the tool to get us to arrive at exactly what it is, a budget for the year, expected expenditures. And I don't know, Jim, if you wanted to add anything to what John had referenced.
Just a couple of comments. A lot of the programs that, I'll just speak for highway alone, a lot of the programs that we do all tie back into the PACER rating. So, most of our crack filling, all that, it's going to tie back into the PACER ratings you do. One thing that, John mentioned earlier was, if the GTA drops, historically, a lot of times it was, well, let's cut highway. Also, on the other side, it's kind of got us in this hole is when our GTA started going up. Highway's getting an extra 400,000. Let's cut highway 400,000. That's what kind of put us here. You kind of got to watch for that either. And then the last thing I'm just going to mention is, with looking at what's mandated, you may really need to look into deeply what's mandated if you want to look at statutes. Wisconsin statutes are so outdated. I can give you one example in there that says if we leave any piles of gravel, whatever, in the road, according to state statute, we need to have that lit, and the kerosene has to have enough fuel in it to be lit through the night. So it talks about kerosene lanterns, lighting stuff. So, you got to take a look also what it is. If I've heard, in the past, some people say, well, we shouldn't do more than what's mandated. Snow plowing, 893, if you look at statute for 893, we have 3 weeks to remove snow. And so you kind of got to look also when you say follow only what's mandated, look what the mandate is, because, I don't believe anybody in this room is going to want to have snow set for 3 weeks before we plow it.
And if I can add one thing, I think that's why the service level, and I included that on page 1 of, actually it's page 2 of the mandate area, trying to illustrate that exact point. It's very common for the state to say, hey, you're mandated to do this, and counties are an arm of the state. We say that very frequently. They turn to us to do the things that they want done, but very rarely do they lay out in specificity, this is the level that you must do it, where it's overly onerous. But make no mistake, as Jim said, I think if we went back to the state mandates on snow plowing or it's not mandated that your county roads be paved, but I'll tell you, I expect, we did try to have a conversation at infrastructure. Jim, when was that, like 2018 and 19, where I was the one that suggested, should you at least talk about, are there certain portions of the county system that you're fine going back to gravel? And it was very clear. The response was, who is this guy and why did he suggest that? So I think that's where you as policymakers, you're the voice of the community and what the service level expectations are. And you do have to balance that, and it's a very tough balance in light of the limited revenues that we have in the state of Wisconsin as county governments, you're balancing that against the impact on the taxpayer. And highway's a great example of that because they have people have expectations with regard to the roadway system, the transportation system, but at the same time, everyone sees their property tax bill, and they associate that with the cost of government. So I wish I had better answers for you, but we'll do our best. If you do give us the direction to, specifically have a reduction in service level, as Supervisor Dickinson referenced with Pacer and Jim made clear, that affects a whole slew of things. Or if it's a targeted thing you want us to evaluate whether or not we do, we can do that as well. But it is going to be, if you have questions, feel free, just reach out in a meeting. You can ask any of the programs that are listed, starting on page 32 for highway, for example. Jim can kind of elaborate on what those are, or I can do my best for any of the other programs.
Thank you, Jim. And Lance, follow up on that. Go ahead, Supervisor Dickinson.
I appreciate both of your comments. If we were to say we want to cut CCIT's budget, sorry, Jerry, I'm going to use you as an example. We want to cut it by 1%. How would you react to that? I believe one of your reactions might be, let's not replace 100 PCs this year. Let's replace 100 PCs next year. I would think, or I'll put myself in your position, that's what I would do. I would say, they're telling me we want a reduction. Now, I have the responsibility to determine what is mandated, what level of service we're at, and how we proceed with that, and then I would assume, make a recommendation. That recommendation would filter its way back up to the board and possibly end up on the budget forecast that the board would then take action on. If we don't know all the programs, and we don't know how the programs are aligned with a ratio of mandated versus discretionary or level of service, and don't get me wrong, I appreciate what you have done. This is a tremendous amount of work that was done, a tremendous amount of information, and is highly valuable to us, without question. This is my fourth budget. So this is the best, without question. But again, if we're going to get down into those, are we to get down into the weeds and say, well, no, I don't want PCs done, I want servers. Let's do less servers this year. You see, it's a program. You have PC replacement, you have server replacement, they're different programs. That seems to me beyond really the scope of us as a board, if we get down into that. And getting back to the overall thought process of the, our budget is, the overall, so our budget is what, 210 million-ish, 220? You're giving us the thumbs up, I'm on The Price is Right, keep going higher. Out of that, about 25% is levy. So the other 75% is money that comes from some other source, grants, et cetera. My mindset is, simply because we get a grant for a program doesn't mean we need to do it. So one way potentially to reduce government is to say, as a board, we don't want to do something, and then we don't take the grant money. And we see a lot of these grants come through, and we feel inclined to take them because, well, it's money coming back to us. It's federal money coming back to us, or state money coming back. I don't think you do something just because you're getting free money for it, or it shouldn't kind of incline you to do it. So overarching, if we have a mindset to reduce the budget, do we now need to get down into every program? I think that we would be relying upon our administration and the departments to say, how can I fit that in with what's mandated, the service levels, et cetera? I hope that clarifies.
If I may.
Go ahead. Supervisor Sybert's next.
Oh,
I just want to touch service. I really don't think that's the place to start. I think place to start is efficiency in each department. Each department, I'll bet if I would ask how much garbage service cost, how much is your electric bill, how much is your heat bill, how many could answer that? You know, in solid waste department, we were at the option of raising fees, but it's a competition business. If you raise the fees, all of a sudden the garbage starts getting, so they started turning off machines during the course of a day, cut a half an hour out of the day. And they saved tens of thousands of dollars doing this. I just think every department has to look at, I'll guarantee you if you look at your garbage contracts, you're being taken to the cleaner. And you could cut 1% easily by turning the heat down, turning the cooling down. Look to save at those levels instead of cutting service. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can-
Administrator Leonard, then
Thank you.
Supervisor
I think
Robinson.
Supervisor Dickinson, you're spot on. I mean, that's the process that staff do every year in terms of trying to, through efficiency, as you referenced, Supervisor Soibert, our revenues don't grow, particularly on the tax levy side, sufficiently to cover the increase in cost. And I'll just, not to belabor this point, in 2018, the cost to continue providing health insurance across the state of Wisconsin for county governments, 68 of 72 counties, it's either 63 or 68, I think it's 68. The cost of the increased cost in that exceeded their net new construction revenue coming in. So the net new, every dollar of new money coming in through tax levy it was insufficient to cover the increased cost in health insurance. So the process that you referenced, Supervisor Dickinson, we are looking at all of those things each year to what is the optimal capital replacement, how can we save funds, how can we deliver the same level of service at the same cost without cutting programs that the board has approved us delivering. If there are opportunities if the board wants to have, the direction is, hey, we do want to reduce the overall size of government, we can bring back recommendations. And that's, quite honestly, that's the point of this discussion is, are there programs and services, to Supervisor Dickinson's point, that despite that it's a grant-funded program, maybe it's 50% offset, we don't want to be in that business. Please provide that direction, and we can come back and present a budget to the county board that does that. Because I think that's absolutely true. There are programs and services. You are not mandated the county board was not mandated to have an aquatic therapy pool at North Central Healthcare. The board approved spending $3 million to do it, to deliver that service. There are other areas where we are not mandated. Please provide that direction. And this is down in the weeds, we can do the capital replacement, push it out a year, but it's been my experience, sometimes those things actually have the opposite effect of what's desired. It's a swinging pendulum, for lack of a better analogy. We had done that with some capital projects. The library roof is the best example, and it ended up costing us more money. We'll bring back the best recommendation we can come with, but we're not going to eliminate a program. We'll make a recommendation to eliminate a program if we think it is important to do that, but we're not going to do that unless the board tells us to, because those programs are things that the board has previously said they want. So it is a bit of a chicken and egg, but please trust that administration, all the things you just referenced, we're looking at doing that with utility costs, turning down heat. We turn, for those of you that have been in county board meetings, when our heat goes off and our air conditioning goes off, and in late summer when you're here if the meeting goes till 11, you'll actually feel it. We do those things. We have optimized heating and cooling. We are looking for the best procurement policies, but the overarching things, if you can provide direction, I hate to go back to PACER rating, but if you say, hey, you know what, 7's too high, we can bring back what that might look like in terms of user experience. We can bring back what that might change in terms of spending flows. If you would have a program, whether it's partially grant funded or 100% grant funded, we can absolutely get out of those businesses with the direction of the board, provided they're not mandated, of course. And I think the other part is it's a little bit, our budget is, misleading isn't the right word, but the growth of the budget over the last several years. One example, Marathon County Special Education isn't really a county department. They're a historical artifact in our budget because it was through us that they accessed various insurances and ETF benefits. What revenues they bring in and expenses they have is entirely outside of the county. Similarly, Central Wisconsin Airport's an enterprise fund. They've grown, utilized a great many reserves, so the budget has gone up because they've accessed a lot more funds, but it hasn't impacted the taxpayer. Solid waste is, to your point, absolutely the same. Their budget has gone up. They've doing significant expansion, so we have a lot of movement in and out of funds, but no net impact to the taxpayer in terms of cost. So it is challenging. I do think the tax levy, certainly I appreciate the board's direction and it's very clear to me the direction to this point has been maintain that stable, non-increasing tax levy rate. I've gotten that, but if you have an area where hey, this isn't where we should be, please let me know what that is. And if the direction is from the county board, you know what, we want to accomplish an end goal, whatever that is, in HR finances, Supervisor Robinson's point is they're going to talk about some of that at their upcoming meeting. We can come back with recommendations, but the guidance as to what you're trying to accomplish it would be very beneficial in that process.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator Leonard. Supervisor Robinson and then Supervisor Stroh.
I want to direct you to the 5-year summaries. And, if you look at it, we've grown from 2018 from $165 million budget to almost $222 million last year. But our levies have gone up 1.8, 2.8, 2.9%. Highway this last year jumped 27.13% in spending. A lot of that was capturing the grants and the other opportunities. So I think a fundamental, I don't disagree with Chris with what you're saying, but I think what is the goal and what's the measurement in terms of the size of government? Is it the number of employees? Because we've been relatively flat in terms of the number of employees. Is it levy? Is it total expenditures? And how does that reconcile with grant opportunities? While we have ARPA, we run that through it. We're using that for broadband expansion. Do we not do those things? I think you need to talk about and refine the discussion in terms of what is the goal, what is the measurement, and what are we doing, and do we seize those opportunities when they present themselves?
Thank you. Supervisor Straub.
I'm looking at page 39 in the packet under the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department. And I see as far as mandated, a lot of it is no. And I'm going to reference back to the County Highway II Land Division in Eldron. To me, and I had spoke with the personnel down at the zoning department. I went there in person, and I look and I see that we have land division ordinance. Is it mandated? No. It is not mandated, but we spend, to me, it seems like personnel, I guess this would be a question to the administrator. Is there a way we can find out how much time is dedicated for personnel to answer land division ordinances, so on and so forth? Because during the board meeting, when I questioned that land division over there in Eldron, Supervisor Langenhans said, if we got it on the consent agenda, if we say no to it, they're going to send it back to the town of Eldron, and they'll just override what we say over here anyway. So it seems counterproductive and very inefficiency. If we can't enforce any land division ordinance, why are we even wasting time having it come to a committee? Why do we even bother voting on a consent agenda for the rezone in Eldron or Burge and wherever? If we say, no, you can't do that, when in fact, then what do we got that on the books for, and why are personnel wasting their time studying the issue if we have no say in the matter?
I can do my best to answer your question. You had two. First, I'll start with the latter. Why are things brought to the board relative to zoning changes or land divisions when perhaps the board isn't the final arbiter of those decisions? I defer to Corp Counsel. There are state statutes that and I think we're actually looking at, we had my understanding there was a conversation about, truly if a town is not in county zoning, what is the role of the county relative to any zoning changes? Similarly, if it's a village, what is our role? The broader question of what I think is aimed at the budget process, can we get you, the amount of staff time that goes to land division ordinances versus other more targeted zoning enforcement. That goes back to my comments earlier about budgeting by program or service versus budgeting by large, what I'll call service areas. And we don't do that. So I don't have, I can't tell you that we know that 0.17% of Dave Mack's time goes to this program, 0.20 goes to something else. We have staff that that work within large program areas. We can work to get that, but it would take some time, and it will be accurate, it won't be precise. And my use of language there is meant to indicate that we're not going to do billable hours like a law firm to say every 7 minutes, where is your time going? But we will get you in the right ballpark, but that's going to take some time.
Well, I guess my question would be more accurately stated. Would personnel in the zoning department prefer not to have to deal with land division ordinances, animal waste ordinances, zoning ordinances? Would they prefer to move away from that and not have to deal with it? Because it's not mandated that the county have these ordinances.
We could have that discussion at ERC and they can ask staff. My response, and I don't know if staff will like this, it's immaterial to me whether or not staff enjoy a certain aspect of a certain program. It is material to me whether or not the board directs us to do it.
Well, one of the common complaints from staff when I was a trustee for the village was that we don't have time. So some people will always say we don't have enough time is the efficiency. If they don't have time and they could better spend their time on, say, the emergency management plan, wouldn't that be resources better used there instead of where we don't need to waste time?
Yeah, I certainly, and we can chat more outside the meeting if you care. My response to that as a supervisor, for my department heads, and I try to make this clear to anyone that I've supervised over my career, is I understand that every employee has preferences in areas, things they're interested in, but staff do not prioritize their work. Their supervisors prioritize their work based on the direction of the Board of Supervisors. Otherwise, it has been my experience that absent that direction and clarity, individuals fill up their buckets with the things they like doing and avoid the things they do not prefer to do, which doesn't necessarily yield the results that I think the board would prefer. So we certainly can have that conversation at ERC. I know enough to know that zoning is a challenging area to work in. The livestock ordinances are challenging areas to work in, but that's immaterial because if the board wants that work done, we will do that work.
Thank you. One more follow-up?
Yeah,
Supervisor
just a
Strong.
follow-up, if I may. So we could eliminate those zoning ordinance, land division ordinances.
We can bring back to you, there are certain ordinances that are not required that you have, but once you have a zoning code, there are, the analogy I use is I use this with solid waste as an example. You are not required to directly provide solid waste services. However, once you decide to do that, the litany of things that are required that follow are immense. And the same thing is true with zoning. Once you have a zoning code in place that the board has adopted, staff are required to administer that code in accordance with the code provisions. And there are state statutes that require various things. We tried to note that in here, but it is an imprecise exercise. For example, within Corp Counsel's office, there's a program that our Corporation Counsel delivers. It's not required that Corporation Counsel deliver it. It is required that it be delivered by either the Corporation Counsel's office or the District Attorney's office. The Marathon County Board of Supervisors has identified the Corporation Counsel's office as the deliverer of that service. So it's a bit nuanced, and I don't want to take up your whole time with that response, but there are certain limitations. And if that's the direction, if those programs are not deemed valuable by the board, we can tell you to the best of our ability what the impact would be if you eliminated them. But it's, again, my analogy, I'm a big analogy person. It's a ball of string, and if you pull on one string, it's going to pull something else out.
Thank you. One more time, Supervisor
Yeah,
Strong.
just my final. So whose ordinance supersedes the others? Is the county supersede the towns?
I can anticipate the lawyer response.
Corp Counsel.
It depends.
You stole my thunder. Is this on? Yeah, it depends. It depends on whether the town has adopted county zoning or not, and then the interplay between their ordinance and our ordinance. So, generally, a county ordinance would have some role in superseding a town ordinance if the town has adopted county zoning, but there's still that ability to override a decision. So it depends. It depends answer is probably the cleanest answer. If you have specifics or specific towns or questions in mind, I can look into that. But generally, there's not a good, clean answer to that.
Thank you.
And the only other thing I'll add is there are areas, county government is an interesting animal. Unlike cities and villages that have, again, that home rule authority that allows them to play in any sandbox that the state hasn't said they're excluded from, we only get to play in the sandboxes where the state gives us permission. It has expressly given us permission. So it's a little bit, that's why it's the it depends answer. But if you do have specific areas that, hey, what would be the impact if we stopped providing this service? I'll give you an example we used yesterday at Health and Human Services with the health department. When you look through the lists of services, the county is not mandated, to perform restaurant inspections. Those are functions based on the level of health department that the county assumes. You have the ability, you're required to have a health department. You're not required to have a level 3 health department. But those services, as I think Supervisor Dickinson brought up earlier, those are, when you look at the funding stream, those are things that our funding philosophy is that our restaurant inspection program, the aim is that it recovers 100% of its operational costs. The benefit that's been articulated to me, and of course it's up to the Board of Supervisors if you deem it sufficient enough to do it, is that the level of responsiveness of a local inspection program warrants delivering that service. That stated differently, the state will take it over, but they will not be into those restaurants at the same frequency that the Marathon County Health Department is. But you absolutely can say, you know what, we're going to get out of that business. So there are zoning pieces that I would say are somewhat analogous, but every situation is specific. That's why, at least in my mind, it's helpful to know if we're delivering services in an area where the Board of Supervisors has given clear direction that, we just don't think we should be in this business anymore. That would be the most helpful guidance you could give, because then we can come back with what would it look like to kind of exit from delivering those services.
Thank you. Supervisor Seibert?
As long as you touched on the health department, I've dealt with the health department for 50 years. And I mean, their budget is probably needed, but the way they spend their budget, examples, my inspector retired, and they sent a gentleman that was with the health department for almost 30 years, and he was going to be my new inspector. And I said, are they going to replace? I said, they replaced it with a college kid. Send her someplace else. And he said, no, he said, we told them that the crew can handle it. We don't need to hire anybody. And a month later, I get a new health inspector. And when I seen him, I said, well, what's going on with that? And he says, well, we told them, but they had the money, they were going to spend it. And I mean, there's things like that going on. They come every 6 months to inspect. And places that get an excellent rating, always find no problems, are in the same category as the bad places, the places that should be shut down. So they could save money on that. I mean, there are so many places they could save money, but if they have the money, they spend it. So that's where I'm at. Thanks.
Thank you. So are there any other comments? Otherwise, I guess, just a quick example of services. This committee, along with the ERC committee and public safety, we gave direction to look at this special events policy, okay? That's another type of service. We do have an ordinance, I believe it's 12.4, not sure, but it's not the ordinance that I guess we can enforce. But is that something, because that's going to affect the fees, the level of service? What do we want the highway department, the public safety committee, what do they want the sheriff's department, as far as say they're having a special event? Do we charge them? Is there a service? Those are all things that, we have to consider, but yet, we want to recover our fees, but how much? And I think Supervisor Hardinger mentioned that that's economic development at one of the meetings when we talked about it. So it's just one, one small part of this, but it's a level of service. What type of service do we want to offer, and at what cost? So, with that being said, what direction do we want to give administration? And I heard level of service, costs, what's mandated, what's not mandated, and the rate that this program, if it's 24 cents on out of a dollar, what are we really saving? And I think Administrator Leonard brought up, what's the effect of that? If we eliminate this program, is it actually going to save the county money? Is it going to affect another department? We don't know that. But all this information that was, offered, through these special programs, what do they cost? I don't know. Highway Department, it's one of the most, as far as percentage of the budget, it's a big, percentage of the budget. So I guess I'm looking for direction. What Administrator Leonard said the other committees gave him direction. What direction do we want to have the administration focus on? Thank you.
I'll just clarify one thing. We didn't get, I wouldn't say we got a whole lot of direction
Oh,
from any of the other committees. They're continuing the conversation. And, I think one of the takeaways, I would be happy to, if you want to go through, if there's programs you don't understand within the Highway Department that, hey, you want to learn more about, we can get that information and bring it to you. Similarly with, if you want to provide direction to the City County IT Commission or Central Wisconsin Airport, you have individuals that you can provide that direction to for them to consider in the development of their budget. But I wouldn't say we got clear direction, hey, get rid of this program or diminish this program. There were questions about, really what are those next steps? And as I understood the next steps from a number of the committees, it's really diving into what are the programs? Are there things we're delivering that that the standing committee felt were opportunities to kind of get out of those program areas? There was some environmental resources probably gave the most pointed requests for information of the committees we've spoken to thus far. One was with respect to the solid waste department, and it's something actually that Dave and I we've been working on. And this has been a request from a number of supervisors for a couple of years, including Supervisor Robinson, that our enterprise funds not only should operate independently of, that they're revenue supported, but they should pay in to the general operations of the county. And that's something for solid waste that Dave and I have been speaking about. And I don't make very many guarantees, but I am highly confident that in the 2024 budget, you will see a contribution in my budget proposal to the board of solid waste, revenues from solid waste actually offsetting general government funding programs. So that was one piece of direction. The other piece was with respect to, we got a question about the Parks, Rec, and Forestry Department and their fee philosophy. So how is it that the fees are developed within Park, Rec, and Forestry? So if you look at that rate and fee document, they have a great many fees. There are some departments that have very little, social services, for example, because their services are delivered, they're mandated in many areas, so you can't really charge for those services. But parks, there's a lot of facility rentals and other camping, all those fees, program fees. There was a question from the committee to have the Parks Department come in and kind of explain what the philosophy has been at the Park Commission, because that's the program committee that sets those fees, what those fee philosophies are. So I would say those were the requests we got for additional information. Not so much direct guidance for budget preparation other than as it relates to solid waste, there was what I'll call general support for that payment into the general fund from solid waste operating revenues.
Thank you. Supervisor Straub, you had one more.
My comment would be in concert with Supervisor Dickinson, what he said earlier about the grant money coming in, and this maybe is for Jim. I'm all in favor of the PACER rating of 7 for Marathon County roads, by the way. But in Cronenwetter, at one point, an offer of $35,000 grant money for road improvements came in. And there was stipulation to how we could spend that money, and it had to be used, and it was identified 2 roadways had to be spent on. It was Peplin Road off of 153 and Sunny Court on the other side of town over in District 15. No, it's right over there. Both roads are about a mile long and a road to nowhere, really. And based on the information, Jim, you had said that the cost of paving roads, that is about $250,000 a mile or something like that. So in the end, we get $35,000 grant money to do the road improvement, for example. What I'm getting at is, is there a hitch to what we have to do when we receive grant money? In Cronenwetter that day, you got to spend we'll give you $35,000, but you have to use the money on that road or that road, nowhere else. That was stipulated that way. And I just felt like, why should we spend $215 or, you know what I mean? Pay the difference, and it's a road to nowhere where the vast majority of the residents didn't get the benefit.
The grants that we give through the state, through the LRIP program, each community submits whatever road they want, so.
I see.
We never stipulate that you need to put it on that road. The amount is whatever the state gives us. For villages, we divide that up like 6 ways or 7 ways. I can't think of it off the top of my head how many we divide that up. But, you know, the roads themselves, those are put in by the municipalities. We have no stipulations on what roads have to be done.
So is there an inefficiency created by taking grant money? And I think that's what Supervisor Dickinson was referring to.
I think it kind of depends on the grant. You know, I'll speak County Highway. You'll see shortly I have a slide in there with all the projects coming up. We have a project coming up on County Trunk Highway P in 2024-25. It's 100%. It's kind of a no-brainer to take those. Most of our grants are 80-20 on projects that we know, and majority of them are on bridges that we know we have to replace that bridge or close down the road. When we submit in a CIP request for our 20%, we also have to look at 3 alternatives of what we're doing. And generally, one of those alternatives, unfortunately for the bridges, is shut the bridge and close the road. That's an alternative. So, you know, we do look at alternatives for each one, but the majority of our funding is 80-20.
I just use that as an example. So does any grant money coming in, whatever department it's earmarked for, does it create a bigger bureaucracy?
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything to add to that, but is there any other discussion? Otherwise, I think we've had a very good discussion on this, and I think it's something that we need to continue, maybe to start every meeting, including next meeting. I don't think we're going to come up with, you know, a solution in a couple of meetings. So I think we just, if there isn't anything else to add, that we just move on, and we'll pick up this discussion next meeting. If that's okay with the committee. Supervisor Robinson?
You know, I really appreciate Supervisor Dickinson's concerns relative to the better understanding. I would hope that we would seize on that thought and really, you know, ask Jim to come in and winter maintenance, what does it involve? What's the expenditure? What have you done from a cost efficiency, you know, the whole issue of salt brine, you know, versus salt. You know, what are we doing? Where are we realizing something? I think there's a lot going on, and we have to do a lot because the levy doesn't even keep pace with inflation. So we've got to get better, and we are getting better, but it might be helpful, and maybe we could schedule it over this is an ongoing process, and you schedule it on a regular basis.
Thank you. Chairman Gibbs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the things that you know I have seen, I've been on the board now since 2006, and the efficiencies that has been achieved, because since 2004 we've had levy limits, and levy limits have been in place since 2004. And what that has done, levy limits have not kept pace with inflation, but the efficiency of government has actually improved. And I'll say it this way, we continue to deliver the services that is expected by the residents. But when I first got on the board in 2006, we had a full-time equivalent of 800 full-time equivalents at the county. And we're down to 720, somewhere in there, 720. So we have, you know, administration, and to credit them and credit the board, has taken efforts and looked at where is there efficiencies that can be gained. Some of it has been gained through technology. Some of it is gained through, elimination of programs and or efficiencies through equipment and efficiencies through processes. So I want to, sit there and also explain that, we have done some of that, but this is, I think, the next step is looking at these programs and understanding what they are, what they're delivering, how they're delivering them, and then figuring out, again, giving the direction to administration to set the priorities. Because without that direction, again, we've had these discussions multiple times in multiple places. A dollar is not the same, the dollar tax levy, again, we tax the tax levy for operations, roughly $50 million. Our total budget, roughly $200+ million. So 25% is what we're actually having any total, and I get the total impact of government and large government and understanding grants, but it's grants that the county has directed because of the services that the citizens are expecting. So that's my comments.
Thank you. All right, if there's no, Administrator Leonard, go ahead.
I don't mean to belabor the point. We've been talking a lot about cutting. I wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity. All of you, I think all of you received the Wisconsin Counties Association and National Association of Counties emails. If there are new programs, innovative things you see in any of those, or you're just thinking about a new program, I do want to make sure that we look for those opportunities as opposed to always looking at the challenges side of the coin, because I think they are available. I mean, this county has been very proactive in a lot of those programs. We talk about the nurse home visiting program. Marathon County started that long before it was a push at the Wisconsin Counties Association and the National Association of Counties based on the return on investment. So if there are things you're seeing or hearing from your constituents that, hey, the county needs to address this issue, or we really like to have this program, I do want to make sure that you see staff as a resource we can have that on an agenda, we can talk about what we know in that space, and perhaps over time develop a plan of what that might look like to develop that here. I know a number of years ago, Chair McEwen and at the time Health and Human Services Chair Boots attended a conference and came back with this idea of, what might it look like for Marathon County to develop a jail, as people were being discharged from the jail, essentially a transitional housing facility, because we had so many people that would be discharged from the jail and come back in. Now, ultimately, we didn't pursue that, but that's not to say we couldn't if that was a priority of the board this coming year. So just wanted to make sure we don't lose sight of sometimes it's been my experience, we're always looking to how to cut and be more efficient, and sometimes the answer is, if constituents have concerns about an issue, we need to be on the forefront of bringing new things, new programs and services. So just thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Seibert?
Thank you. What's the proper procedure for a board member to get something on the calendar?
Chair Gibbs.
Well, I guess it really would depend on what the item is. If there's an item that, a supervisor has an area of interest under our board rules, you bring it to the attention of the chairman. Chairman then disseminates the issue to a appropriate standing committee of jurisdiction. So depending on what it is, it will go to that standing committee. Then the standing committee will act upon it one way or the other, whether it's acted upon as the as the supervisor wishes it to be, is entirely up to the committee of jurisdiction. If the committee of jurisdiction takes no action, there's also a remedy in our rules that says that you can then bring the issue to the executive committee for discussion. And if the executive committee does not move something to the full board, well, then it's done. But that's per our rules. That's the rules that we've adopted.
Does the request always get to a committee? Or can it be shot down before it gets to the committee?
It can be, well, it has to, within 60 days, go to a committee. Depending on when the committee meets, will depend on when that will be taken up.
Thank you, Chairman. And I believe that process was changed the last rules review and was voted on. There was a different process where 2 supervisors had to request, but that was all revised in our rules, which is in 2.01. Yeah, so. Okay, thank you. Is there anything else? All right, I think we're on number 6. Ordinance functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. We have none. Moving on to number 7, educational presentation and committee discussion. 7A is the 2023-2024 Marathon County Construction Project, and there's a presentation in your packet, and Jim's going to walk us through that. Thank you.
First off, I apologize to the 4 people that were at the Towns Association on Thursday night. You get to see the same presentation twice, so. I'm going to run through some of our projects, mostly for this upcoming year and following year, but mainly focus on 2023 construction and some of the different methods that we use. One thing we've been starting to use right now is a little bit more is a thin overlay. We started out probably 8-10 years ago putting these down. This is, well, we did a good job paving this year. We have some extra. Let's go make these roads last a little bit longer. As we start to review these roads, we found out the thin overlays were a great tool in our toolbox to make some of these roads last maybe an additional 8 to 10 years. Depending on the road, sometimes we'll mill a ½ inch, sometimes we'll mill 1.5 inches. But, this kind of average, if we mill 1 inch and place a 2-inch overlay, we've been seeing an additional 8 to 10 years of life on those roads. So we have some of those projects coming up this year. Again, this is another picture showing the thin overlay on the road, what it can do for us. This is a thin overlay after, this is the picture, and this is after a few years. Some of the reflective cracks still come through, but you can see a number of years later, this road was still in excellent shape. Our normal process is a pulverize and relay. That's where we go out there, we pulverize the existing road, lay it back down, and put 4 inches of asphalt on it. We usually use these roads when we know the base course is a little weaker. By pulverizing the existing road, it gives an additional strength to the road base, because your asphalt is only as good as what's underneath it. So we want to have a good base underneath it. Those thin overlays I talked about previously, we know there's a good base under those, so we'll take these. The disadvantage of these is every time we put 4 more inches of asphalt, the side slopes come in, the roads are getting a little bit narrower, so the shoulders and the width of the road kind of get reduced a little bit. And another method we've started using is cold in place recycling. We probably started this how many years ago, Kevin? 2016 was the first. 5 years ago. 6 years ago. So what we do on these roads is you mill up the existing road, you inject asphalt foam right into the material. It goes back into the paver, and you lay it right back down. So the road's never gravel out there, it's asphalt. You need to let those roads lay a few weeks to cure before we end up putting the top mat on. Generally, we've been going back and putting 2 inches of mat. These roads, we understand that the base is fairly good underneath the roads. Again, so Kevin and I review each road that we're going to pave during the year and decide, will it be a mill and fill? Will it be a pulverize? Or will it be a cold in place? Mostly depending on the amount of volume on that road and the condition of the road and the base that we know it's underneath it. The other thing we started doing is we've been placing a seal coat down, just for a better example is just people seal their driveways, you know. So we've been doing that. Old tradition used to be wait 8, 10 years, 12 years, the road's ready to start falling apart, and then you seal it. So, you know, we use the example of sunscreen. You know, do you hand the sunscreen to the person on the left or the cute little baby on the right? That's my baby picture. I hear some dissension. I don't believe it's my baby picture. But, you know, we want to treat those roads when they're new. We've been treating roads the same year they're paved, you know, to keep that oil into the road. So that's another thing that we've been doing a lot this year, and we're going to be doing that again this year. There's this picture of them fog sealing the road. And the other thing is scrub and chip sealing. We used to put the oil down on the road and then put the chips on top. Still a very widely used practice. But what we've seen, you can see the brushes on these. What it does is it kind of scrubs the oil into the cracks a little bit more so you don't have that voids underneath the oil. And we put the chip seal on top of it. We're doing about 8 miles of that procedure this year. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I don't expect you to be able to read everything through here, but by just looking at the colors, these are, on the bottom are the town projects, on the top are the county projects. You can kind of see down here on the bottom, this section is all town projects. These are the projects that are coming up. These are all projects that we do have federal funding for, that we have received grants. Most of them 80-20, but there are some 100% in there, especially for the towns. They were able to get 100% on a few different projects down there. So the yellow shows just what we're going to do this year, and I'll go through those here shortly. But the green shows what we're going to be doing. The yellow are the projects we're doing in 2024. I'll go through the 23 projects, and the green are projects we're going to be doing in 25. So we have 10 projects going on in 2025. All but one of those are bridge projects. So for the work for the summer on their county system, we'll just kind of start out with the light purple here. Those are going to be our paving projects. County Chunk Highway B is going to be a combination of mill and fill, and when we get into town, we're doing a little bit more work. This committee last year approved a jurisdictional transfer in the Village of Marathon. So when we get into Marathon, right in here, from South Road up to 107, once we rebuild that, we'll be turning that over to the Village of Marathon. The other purple roads are, for time, I won't go through them, but these are our paving projects. The Highway S from C up to 153, that is going to be a pulverize and relay. The rest of them are a combination of mill and fills. We're kind of doing Highway O all the way from C up to double N. Again, mostly mill and fills and overlay projects. We have another small section here that we're going to do some other work. And I believe that is it for the major construction. We do have 5 bridges that are going on six bridges. 5 bridges on the town system. We have one down, way down south in the Town of Day, Green Valley Town line. That project will be starting sometime in mid-June. We have one over by Stratford on Equity Street. That project will be starting after the 4th of July. We have 2 projects up here in the town of Satine. Those are probably going to be a later start. I have no dates on those. And we have a project in Rib Falls. That is going to be a late June, early July start. And then we are building one project with our own crews, starting right after the school year, up in the town of Halsey, right by Athens Hard Rock, a bridge replacement. But our major project this summer that has been bid out is the County Trunk Highway K project, starting just north of Wausau, going up to the county line. That includes a roundabout at the intersection of WW and Highway K. Overall, this project's a little over $9 million, which over half of it we have received funding for through the safety funds, STP Urban or STP Rural. It's a combination of different funding, so a little over 50% of that has been paid for by outside funding. We are going to do, as I mentioned, some of these chip seals down on Highway M, down in Tom's neighborhood, right past his place. Expect to have lunch out there someday, Tom. But from Roselville down to the county line, that's going to be one of those chip seal projects I talked about. And then we're also doing the same thing on Highway J down here. The rest of the roads in purple, we have double V, a small section of D, piece of U, Highway P and Highway M. We are going to be doing fog seals on this year. The state projects happening this year, everybody on the west side of the county is very happy that Highway 153 project has started this week. Let me see, the Highway 13 project from N up to Linden Street in Abbotsford. That is a mill and fill project. They are working currently out on Highway 29 from Highway E to H. Between E and 97, they're going to fix the slabs in the eastbound lane where they're bad. From 97 to H, that's a total reconstruct of the eastbound lane. So the traffic will be diverted over, so expect some delays in there. In Marathon City, between Meritech and First Street, the DOT has a project coming up later this summer. That's going to be a mill and fill. 153, outside of Mosenito, 107. That project is a leftover from last year that they're finishing up on. And they're also doing later this summer westbound lanes from Bass Lake Road to Highway D on Highway 29. They're replacing that section of road with asphalt.
Jim, the marathon project started already. First,
Move it up. Great.
they're grinding the bridge down already.
In 2024, we have some projects here that we're going to be taking on. Federally funded project is on Highway T from 97 down to the South County line. The other federally funded project is Highway J from 153 up to 29. We're going to be looking at doing Highway X from the county line up to, I believe that's Wood Road. And we also have a federally funded project on Highway C from J out to Highway I. So those are the projects that are coming up next year on the county side. On the state side, in 2024, they're looking at doing 51 from north of Wausau to the county line and Highway 13 from Man up to where they're leaving off the project this year on County Trunk Highway N. So this is kind of a quick rundown of our projects that are coming up. I'm just going to run the slides here for Kevin, but
Jim.
Kevin's kind of gone.
Jim, sorry, can I ask one question?
Sure.
On Highway T, where it intersects into 97, is anything being done to change the way that,
A slight change, but most of that's DOT. The slight work that they did was part of that 97 project last year.
because I know they worked on the bridge there and
Yeah.
replaced that, but I didn't, it's such a tricky
a bad angle, but
interchange.
there's not
I didn't
much.
know if there were,
There's some wetlands on the south side and the river on the north side, so kind of what that one is what it is. The Highway T project's mostly just polarized and relay. I forgot to mention, we were talking earlier about budgets. Majority of that work that we just spoke about is paving. That's one of our biggest programs, $6.3 million. The registration fee covers roughly about 3 million, just a shade short of 3 million for the registration fee. So $6.3 million is our biggest program that we have. With that being said, 5 million of that, of the 6.3 is materials. That's stuff that's out of our control. Farner Asphalt this year, they have an increase of what, 15.7% for labor. So again, 6.3 million, 5 million of that is materials, 700,000 is labor, and the rest is equipment. So, 6.3 million, and we're talking 700,000 for labor. So a lot of those costs are out of our control. What we want, if we want to keep up that rating that we have, again, mostly materials. We can be as efficient as we can, but a ton of asphalt's a ton of asphalt. So Kevin's got some other prices here with asphalt, oil, steel, and fuel you can run through.
Yeah, we just pulled together some of the, there's like an index site that had asphalt oil on it. Wisconsin's not a reporting state, so their data wasn't in there, but usually when we look at our prices, like our neighboring states, the Minnesotas and Illinois seem to be comparable to us. So we just pulled together some of the big raw materials that are used out on road and bridge projects are listed on there. The blue line is our asphalt oil. The orange line is steel pricing, and the fuel is the gray line down at the bottom. So we just pulled it out, kind of show what some of those outside expenses are and the trends that are going on. I will note on there, it's cost, but I used multipliers so they all fit on the same table. The steel's multiplied by 10, so it's not $500 per hundredweight, it's 50. Same thing with fuel, it's not $300 a gallon, it's in that $3 range. But just kind of shows from 2016 to current where those trends are going on those, and that's our culverts. We use a lot of steel culverts. Our bridges have a lot of railing. Our guardrail has a lot of steel in it. So those are the things that impact our project costs. And then the second one is this is a percentage based. So it's based off of a 2016 and where we're at from 2016 to present. So the far side is April 2016 on the left, and on the right is April of 2023. So you see, I'll use steel as an example. Basically, our steel prices for raw materials are doubled compared to what they were just for that raw product, not the labor to assemble it, the trucking to get it here. So just wanted to give kind of that puzzle piece when we look at making cuts. Some of these things are areas we don't have any control over.
Is there anything else, Jim or Kevin?
No, that was, Ken, we just want to give you a quick rundown of our upcoming projects for this year.
Jim, should I hit real quick on X and KK, our two projects we're kicking off this week? So if you guys get any questions on it, Camp Phillips Road, we're doing a small mill and overlay on there. We're doing utility work, coordinating with Weston with that right now. And then the week of May 15th, we plan to kick that off. Those lanes are 11 feet wide. Our paver is, when you put the additions on and widen it out, our paver's over 11 feet wide. So by the time we get the traffic out there, our crew, trucks, and the paver, mixing those things up safely isn't the best idea to keep that live traffic. So we're planning on closing that road at Schofield Avenue. We'll detour that down to Highway J and Schofield Avenue. We coordinated with the village for that. So we're looking at a 1 week process in there. Monday we come in, start with the milling. Tuesday continue that and do any repairs, and then Wednesday into the night. We're working with our contractors to get some lights on so we can pave that at night when there's the least amount of traffic out there, and try to get that work done all within 1 week. We are not going up to the 29 interchange with that work. That's going to be a question that if anybody asks you may come up. That is part of a state's jurisdiction when you get up by 29, and they're currently working on plans for that. They had the scoping meeting for it, I think, back in February. So they have plans coming up for that. It's years down the road, but based on their scoping out a major project for it right now, they didn't want to do much up there until they figure out what their process is. So we're stopping short of that. So if people are asking you about that, you can understand that that's under the state's jurisdiction, so we don't have control to go all the way up there. The other one is KK. That was our emergency culvert. We've worked with, I think we have 3 fiber optics out there, gas and electric. We've accelerated the moves on all of those. Our contractor who's building that box culvert, he accelerated his schedule a little bit, and we are looking at starting removals out there next week, excavation the following, the finish up the excavation and prep for the placing that box culvert, and then the week of Memorial Day is when we are shooting to get that box culvert to start setting it. It's people have asked about why we couldn't start sooner. It's about 850,000 pounds of concrete that the box culvert is. So that's not just something that was sitting in the yard ready to ship out. So it's all custom fabricated. So if anybody's got questions on those, otherwise we'll.
Supervisor Hardinger, go ahead. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. So I also sit on Village of Weston. So we've had a lot of the same discussions with our public works guys and dealing with the bridge up there. So our understanding is you're going from Schofield and just short of the bridge, roughly around the intersection part where the new Quick Trip and everything is right there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a couple inlets in there. We're working with a contractor that does mud jacking
Yep.
just to do some improvements in those, but I didn't want to get too far up to the lights because then it gets into a whole different game of traffic control.
Yeah, I'm aware of it with
Okay.
so it, and I noticed they were doing patching this last week, or I don't know if Weston did it or in conjunction with your guys or our guys just did the patching on it. I just found it odd that they were doing the patching and we're going to be ripping up the road.
They are doing inlet repairs, so some of the inlets, you start to see settlement in there. Our guys are pulling up the grate that's on it, the cast iron grate.
Yep.
The rings underneath there are concrete, and they deteriorate faster than everything else. So they're doing repairs on those that are broken and getting those reset. And then a lot of times, after time, soil will start to weep in for the pipe. So they're mudding those to seal them all up. And the scope of our project, it's a mill and overlay for that one. We're taking off about 2 inches of concrete and putting 2 inches of asphalt back, basically to give it a good ride. Those overlays last 5 to 8 years. The last one we did was 6 or 7 years. And Jim and I have started talking that looking at getting some long-range planning for that corridor beyond. This overlay should get us out that 5 to 8 year range. That road's pretty well at capacity, and the infrastructure's coming to the end of its useful life. So
Well, it's tricky too because it's county and then you've got DOT with the bridge and then you've got parts of Weston, even though all three of those kind of have to come together. And I know it's been a process just because everybody has to, and especially with the bridge, they said, well, we want to do this. Well, we can't do that because we have to figure out what we're going to do with it yet with the DOT concerning it. So you're ripping up the top layer and you're putting down are you north and south at the same time between Schofield and?
Yep, it'll look just like we're right up by Schofield Avenue.
Okay.
Same scope of work as that, and it's basically to get a reasonably smooth riding road for the next 5 to 8 years while we can do some planning to see what the next phase is.
I appreciate that. No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, do you have anything else for the projects? Any questions? 23, 24 county projects. Okay, thank you. Moving on to 7B broadband update. Supervisor Robinson.
Be quick. We're trying to work with the various internet service providers to get a schedule of where they're working and when they're working, and that's been it's not been an easy process, but we're going to continue to try to do that, and we'll try to make that information available because we're always getting questions about who's doing what work on what town, and they're not sure because there's independent crews, whether it's Charter, Spectrum, Bug Tussle, Frontier is about to start, or other carriers. So we hope to be able to get that information. Some of that we may be able to get through Jim's shop because they're applying for those utility accommodation policies, but we're struggling with getting that information. I want to spend most of the time talking about the broadband equity in access deployment grant, that $42.5 billion grant. The state is in the process of developing a plan on how they'll use those dollars. That the dollars will be somewhere between $800 million and $1.1 billion over the next 5 years for the state of Wisconsin. So they're working on a plan, develop a plan, but they also made a grant available for locals to do that. We partnered with Synergy, the Regional Economic Development Association, and are working with Portage, Wood, Lincoln, and Adams counties on that grant. We were required to submit goals earlier this month, and basically the goals were to continue to promote, collect, map, and analyze speed test results, to develop a full understanding of unserved and underserved locations in the county, and we're also looking to provide, through the grant, provide technical assistance to subgrantees, including workshops to support the development of the 5-year state plan with the outcome to provide resources and guidance to counties to develop the plan. So we're working with these other counties, but we're all approaching it somewhat independently. Marathon County is much farther along in the planning process, and we've been at this for a longer period of time than the others, but we'll be looking for ways to increase stakeholder involvement, and I think our efforts will probably focus in on that LTD service area. If you remember the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, where LTD was awarded a contract, only to have FCC revoke that approval. So there's good portions of the western part of the county there that are underserved. We need to get a better understanding of that. We also know that we have other areas in for instance, northeastern Marathon County, Harrison, and other areas, but we want to try to identify those areas. It doesn't appear as if there will be any grants available this calendar year through the state. I've had some discussions with the PSC staff. They think that there may be a $2 million grant, which is inconsequential in the overall scheme of things. Frontier currently has an application in. There was $14.1 million of grants, and we supported that project. We'll know in the near future, but there was $50+ million of requests for that $14 million. So it's going to be a reach. But we'll need to take that planning and then try to figure out how we'll target and work with the various internet service providers to try to get into some of those unserved areas.
Thank you. Supervisor Seibert?
Is there anybody in the county or at the town level that is notified when, I touched base with this with John before, when solar, wind, or cell towers are going up? And who's following when they come in on roads? Who in the county is following their process of destroying roads? Is anybody? Do we have any authority? Like we had one that came down, a cell tower that came down a posted road. I think Jim can talk on that cell tower down by, that ran, and they had called me up who to notify, and I gave them Jim's name, and apparently they didn't. I mean, do they come to anybody in the county and say, we're bringing a tower in, what do we need to do? Or we're bringing a wind tower in, or we're bringing solar in? Who do we talk to?
The only thing I get, Tom, is, they do have permits for it, but usually, and we had the conversation 5 minutes before we left the office, one issue we're starting to get and we're not approving them. We just got 3 permits today that they said they want to start work May 15th and between May 15th and November. You need to narrow it down a little bit, so I do not get notified otherwise when they had the tower brought in last week. I wasn't notified until I got the email, so I was not.
So on these windmills now that are coming, they're coming to town of Plain, town of Brighton, town of McMillan, town of Day, signing contracts, going to bring in, who's going to watch those roads? Who's going to know if they bring in that 180,000 pound rig down our roads? Who's going to follow behind and make sure? It's almost going to take a full-time person just to track what these guys are doing in the highway department.
I know I spoke to Lafayette County. They were big into windmills 10 years ago, 8 years ago. Before they come in, we, on our county system, I suggest the local municipalities do the same. We sign local road agreements with them. So you can put in that local road agreement. We need to be notified in 2 weeks. You're going to get charged for any damages. So if those heavy towers come in like that, there will be road agreements. Speaking to the former commissioner down there, he actually said they were very good to work with as far as the road end of it. I'm not getting into the whole wind tower issue, but as far as the roadway itself, the company that they had, which was the same company that was talking about building west of Stratford, it was the same company. He said they were great to work with at that point. So again, it was 6-8 years ago. Who knows who's there? But that was a situation back then in Lafayette County.
Okay,
So you recommend the towns pass their own ordinance on road? Or how?
Well, before these companies come in, what I was told, they'll contact you and work with local road agreements.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for John on the broadband? Jerry, you have anything to add?
No, I've been working with John, we've been meeting with Bud Tussle, meeting with Synergy. I've just been working with John on the same thing that John's talked about. Working with Bug Tussle, working with Frontier. Michael and I and John are still trying to negotiate a working contract with Frontier. That's been moving very slowly. I still haven't. Lance's name is connected to the CostQuest license for us to do the challenge to the map, and they have been unresponsive since April 20th, I think, right? So,
Okay, thank you. Any questions for John or Jerry? Supervisor Hardinger?
So just for my understanding, we apply for the grants, Bud Tussle, whoever's doing the broadband is applying for these grants. And whatever gets approved back from the grants is basically the extent of work that they're going to do that year and so on and so forth for the continuation of the project until it's complete.
Depends upon the grant.
Okay, so I guess
So
my-
with Public Service Commission,
Right.
it's a two-year window. With the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, which is what Spectrum is doing out in, or Charter, in the county, I think they've got 6 years to do it. And then we've got, those are the grants. And then we have an agreement with Bug Tussle relative to the borrowing, the conduit borrowing. We don't have specific timeframes in there. There were expectations, and we're starting to see some missing delivery dates where they would hope to have all of their towers. This is for 16 towers and 370 miles of fiber. They were hoping to have the towers constructed by the end of last year and the fiber live this year. We're starting to see some supply side and other delays associated with that. So we're pushing all of them for schedules without a lot of success. Bug Tussle has a fiber project down in Cronewater, Gunther, Knowlton. Frontier has 10,500 homes throughout the county, both eastern and western sides. So they're going to get us a schedule this month.
So back to funding. A chunk of it is grant funded. And then where's the rest of it coming from?
So we have, it depends upon the grant. So the Public Service Commission has opened up a number of grants. We were approached. We partner with them, like the most recent Frontier grants for the immediate Waus area. We pledged $10,000 toward each of those grants, and they're putting in others. For the 10,500, we have pledged $944,000 plus dollars to Frontier. Basically, what we came up with in that case was a $235 per unit served match. The rest comes from Frontier. They started out with 4,000 plus homes, and they kept changing the numbers. We locked our level of commitment at that 4,000. So we're not, while they're serving 10,000, they're only getting 944 from us. With Bug Tussle on that conduit borrowing, we're the guarantor of that grant. Should they default, we don't have any money per se into it. Instead, we have access to those towers. We have some of the fiber, and they're paying us 50 basis points on any outstanding debt associated with it, so they could access lower interest. So some of it's coming from the feds, some of it's coming from bonding, some of it's coming from the PSC and the state dollars or other, either rural digital opportunity funding.
No, I appreciate it. And I'm sure Administrator Leonard has something to add to that. Or
he just asked me to clarify the total cost of the Frontier project. It's 10,000 homes. When they did the paperwork with us and asked us to do our match of 944,000, there was a smaller project at that time, but I believe their total project is 14 million. So we're putting in just shy of $1 million. They're doing 14 million.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Chairman Gibbs?
And just to add on to that, where those dollars are coming from, those dollars are all ARPA funding dollars that are, so they're passed through. So I mean, they're coming from the feds under the ARPA allocation that the county received, and we reallocated those for those projects, and the boards approved those fundings for those projects for Frontier and for Bug Tussle.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs.
Thank you. All right, any other questions, discussions? Okay. All right, moving on to number 8, next meeting dates, times, announcements, and future agenda items. If any of the committee members have any agenda items they would like placed on there, let myself know, or Jim. Supervisor Hardinger?
No, thank you. So the last board meeting that we had, Supervisor Baker brought up the Kowalski Road exit. I think there was a plan, and I'm glad you're here, Chair Gibbs. And I was, from what I understand, the economic survey for putting you could probably definitely weigh in on this too, putting a exit on Kowalski Road. They had a survey that was done, and they said, well, it's gonna add to jobs in the area because it could grow the industrial park, could add assistance to residents trying to get in and out of that area because the Cedar Creek exit is always kind of a mess, or very busy, I guess I should say. But I was a little confused because I don't remember coming across here, and I would think this committee would see something like that or get a chance to review it, being a road, but.
Yeah, well, I really don't want to get in too far in the weeds because it's not on the agenda, but.
Right. Well, it's just I'm asking if we could possibly talk about it at the next meeting, or.
I'll talk to you about that, but thank you. That's what I want if you got agenda items, but.
Okay.
And Chairman Gibbs can explain it a little bit further with the process of that, but yeah, I just don't want to get into too many.
I just didn't know if it was something that we. To me,
Okay,
it seems like a
I'll-
road, and we're an infrastructure
Yeah.
committee. I think maybe that would be part of it, especially having the
That-
commissioner here. But
Yeah, that makes sense. So,
I mean,
but,
if it's a policy thing or whatever it
Yeah.
is, it just.
okay, I'll talk to you after the meeting. Okay, thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. So 8B, the next meeting is Thursday, June 1st, 2023 at 9 o'clock. If there's no further, go ahead, Supervisor Dickinson. You make motion to adjourn, or motion to adjourn by Supervisor Dickinson, second by Supervisor Hardinger. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.